Welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by Josh Sullivan.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Matt Van Milligan.
Hello.
And we're getting to the age where some might consider us relics, but today we're going to talk about relics of Jesus. I know someone asked me if we would do a podcast on relics itself, where they come from, why we take them, what we do with them, all that stuff. But first, before we talk about those types of relics, I think it's really important to recognize that there are relics of Jesus hanging around. And just to give us some background on why this is so special, and you know, obviously we're not talking about like bones of Jesus because, you know, Jesus rose from the dead. But the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that the veneration of relics is an acceptable form of devotion and piety. And veneration of relics, visits to shrines that have them, pilgrimages, processions, stations of the cross are forms of piety in which religious belief finds a form of expression that surrounds the sacramental life of the church. That's Catechism 1674. And to give people some background, in the early church, the veneration of these relics of Jesus were used during Holy Week celebrations to bring alive the celebrations that they did during Holy Week. And so those relics of Jesus that have to do with his passion, death, and burial, they're considered like first class, the first relics of the church, first class, because they are of the resurrection and ascension of our Lord. So what are they? Where do we find them? And how do we see them? And why would we want to see them is the question. Because there's a lot.
Yeah, it's funny that you started even saying like because of the Ascension. We probably don't have any what would be first degree relics of, and maybe it's worth kind of breaking that open a little bit because we have relics that are different degrees, so like a first degree relic is actually a part of the saint. Of the a second degree relic would be something personal, would be something either owned by the saint or it would be have an attachment, and then third degree is something that was maybe touched, a piece of fabric, a piece of but you wouldn't expect there to be any first degree relics of Jesus. And as we'll kind of go through today, different relics have different, we'll say, kind of status of authenticity as some of them have a tradition attached to them. Some of them are claiming to be relics. Some of them are pretty established within the church. But there are claims that to have first degree relics of Jesus, there's a claim that things that would have been left behind as a result of the Ascension, that people claim to have Jesus' baby teeth, or pieces of hair, or because he would have, if he trimmed his beard, or any of these things. So again, we'll talk about kind of different gradations of authenticity, but there are claims out there. There are and again, it'd be interesting to kind of investigate whether or not there are actually any first class relics of Jesus. The only one I think that has kind of been verified is the blood. The blood of Christ that's been either preserved in other relics, or that there are some claims to having drops of blood that were kind of gathered at the Passion and Death.
Cool.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the Passion and the Death of Jesus, what sort of relics would we say are out and about there?
Pretty much anything that you can mention that Jesus would have touched, there's probably a relic for. But I think there's importance to say what is verified relics and what's not, because there's a lot of there are certain church verified relics, meaning that the church holds that these are probably the truth, and then there are just a lot of claims. And so especially during the times of Crusades and when people needed we got Jesus with us now, we got a piece of his real hair, and then like he's going to lead us into battle, or we talked about I forget who you said was had the true nail in his crown.
Constantine.
Constantine Emperor Constantine put it. So like those are ways that people use the relics almost as superstitious, as this gives me extra power, this, that, or the other thing. And I mean, Indiana Jones just goes all the way through it and kind of, from the Holy Grail to the, searching for the Holy Grail. Anyways, So those true relics that have been defined, the church has a couple of them, and then things like the nails of the cross that nailed Jesus to the cross. Things like the true cross that Jesus was actually, and there were the crown of thorns. There are the veil of Veronica. There are the shroud of Turin, and we can talk about a little bit of those things.
And now that you list these things, I'm just remembering that a couple weeks ago we celebrated the Christmas and the Christmas season, and I remember that the manger. The creche. I'm trying to think of the name. Was on display, I believe, if I remember correctly, at the Vatican. It was on display for the. Isn't that amazing?
There are a series of relics that are associated with the Nativity. So like the manger itself, the swaddling clothes. There's a claim that these are still. In existence,
Now, again, I think one of the things we have to understand, or maybe take apart, is the fact that are all these relics true, and what if they're not? Because I think again, it came at a time where you could sell relics and you could make good money on convincing a royal person that this is the real true relic of Jesus, and a lot of con artists probably took that advantage, especially around the Middle Ages and that kind of things. And later on, as we have now science to prove and science to disprove, I'm going to say certain things. There are relics that are not tested, that aren't necessarily, but there are a lot of relics that have been tested, and then certain authenticity. Thank you. Brings it to the forefront. Like one of the ones, for instance, is that I looked into was the veil of Veronica. So if you remember the story of veil of Veronica, we don't hear it so much in the Bible as we do through like the Stations of the Cross. And it's when Veronica, who was Roman, or I'm going to say not royalty, but is higher class, stepped out and swabbed the face of Jesus, basically wiped the sweat and blood from his brow, and then when she came back, the tradition holds that the image of Jesus' face was still on the cloth that she wiped his face with.
Right.
During that passion, during that walking up of the, and the cool part about that is we actually have dates and people that have written about it from anywhere from like 160 AD, telling the story of Veronica and wiping the face of Jesus. 160 years after Jesus died, there was this relic, and the stories and talking about it, and from all different sources, from Roman sources, from Christian sources, from Jewish sources and stuff, talking about this veil. So we kind of know that this veil existed. What happened is we follow this through, and eventually 680 AD, I think there's a couple more mentions, 770 AD, there's another mention or two about this veil of Veronica. And then it gets to the point in 1600s, all of a sudden we kind of lose track of it. And then there becomes a couple of veils that come out that say it's the true veil. And so we kind of know now, like the Vatican holds the veil of Veronica and talks about the story, but it's kind of proven that we don't think that that's the real veil of Veronica. So why does the Vatican still hold it? Why do they still show it? Why do they? It probably just to talk about the story of Veronica and the like that story, how awesome it is and how it could change your life just if you meditate on it and you understand it, like through that specific station of the cross.
The sixth station.
Yeah, and so kind of a cool thing. We do believe that the real veil might actually be in Monopolo, and they might actually have it there in the church, but we have to do some scientific testing and everything else to verify it. The church doesn't, the church doesn't put forward, this is absolutely the right veil. This
right.
is, but does hold, hey, at certain times, if they want, then maybe we'll get some scientific testing on it, and then we can prove. The thing is, if it's proven to be false or if proven to be right, that shouldn't really shake your faith.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Do you ever think that, the first thing you do if you ever become Pope is just like go in the basement and try and find all this stuff? But like, wow, this would be amazing. Okay, all joking aside, I'm really interested in the relics of the true cross. What can you tell me about that? Because I was fascinated. We went on a little pilgrimage last summer. I think it was last summer. Was it this past summer?
With the Pope?
And and we stopped. Actually, no. I've seen a relic of the true cross a number of times, mostly on our pilgrimages. But this past summer we saw I think in a church in Montreal.
I believe it was, yeah.
And then I think we saw the relic of the true cross with the companions of the cross.
They had
at
all those
one
relics
time.
there. That was cool.
Yeah, so obviously a cross that's held the body of Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking a relic, just to give some people at home a picture, it's like probably like a sliver.
Yeah.
It looks like a sliver.
So the pieces of the true cross that are currently kind of I don't want to say in circulation or like around that people know about are small. And you have I think the quote is attributed to Martin Luther, but I haven't read it in him specifically. But he's saying if you were to add up all of the pieces of the true cross, it would be enough, like to build a ship or to be. Okay. But since and
somebody
kind of
actually did.
someone actually kind of any kind of legitimate claim to kind of authenticity of pieces. It's actually a much smaller portion of the whole cross.
Okay.
And like, do you want kind of the background
Yeah,
of the?
know,
Okay,
like,
so
how did we get this?
Yeah.
Like we're talking about here in Canada. How did we get in Ontario and Quebec these pieces of the True Cross? Like where did they salvage it from?
So like the True Cross itself was said to be like just kind of kept in Jerusalem and was kind of a relic of the early church. But the early church was under tremendous persecution by. So again, they didn't really have the latitude to be like to bring all these things with them as they kind of moved around. But the story goes, or like there is again, some people will dismiss this as kind of a legend, but there is actually some historical record and context for this claim that Helena, Saint Helena, the mother of Constantine. The emperor. This is well after. Rome was converted to Christianity. Emperor Constantine was converted.
So we're talking like 4th century?
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioned his mother and a group of people to go back to the Holy Land to look to see if they could find relics specifically around kind of the Passion Death of Christ. They did go to Bethlehem as well, but it was said that they were able to locate 3 crosses from that time period or from that area, and the way that they kind of verified that the true cross was the true cross is that it actually performed a miracle. They brought someone who was terminally ill. Some of the stories say that the person was already dead, and touched each of the crosses, and on the one cross they were miraculously healed. So that was taken as, and it was kept. There are pieces, like larger pieces that are still kept in Jerusalem. There are larger pieces at the Vatican in Rome, but the main timber or the was again, you have accounts of it being kind of moved around and kept. Again, as a symbol of the Holy Roman Empire for hundreds of years, but that main piece or that larger section was actually lost during the Crusades. That it was taken by, I think, again, my history is a little bit dodgy here, but by Saladin. What I find interesting about that is that you were talking about kind of reasons why people would want to like that people want to sell relics to wealthy people because peddlers of relics of dubious authenticity to like these people with money. It's like there's no like positive motivation for that story to exist because it's actually quite embarrassing that the Crusaders lost the main timber of the true cross, but other pieces are retrained. They've been retrained through the High Middle Ages into the Renaissance and now in a very roundabout way of answering your question, we have kind of small fragments distributed kind of all over the place.
Okay, on the topic of like the crucifixion, the cross, all that stuff, like part of the Passion, like I know that there's a relic of the scourging pillar.
Yeah.
And that is preserved right now.
In Rome, right?
It was apparently it was taken to the Church of the Apostles atop Mount Zion after the destruction of Jerusalem, and right now it's a portion of it is believed to be housed in one of the oldest churches in Rome, Santa Prassede.
I saw it there when I went. That was kind of a cool spot when I went to Rome to be able to see that. I think at the time they had a whole bunch of different things on display, and I don't know if they had the true things on display, but they talked about the relic of the crown of thorns and the 3 nails, and they talked about the shroud of Turin there, and they had like the images all on display, and you could see kind of what it would kind of look like, and they had descriptions of them all, and the history, like how they follow the history. And you said, like, I just looking up the true cross, the little research that I did, it was last seen in Damascus, and the Knights Templar, it was offered in 1219. So Saladin stole it in 1187, but it was in 1219. It was offered for the Knights Templar by Al Kamil in exchange for lifting the siege of Demedia. I guess that's how you say it. But it was never delivered because he actually didn't have the cross. Oh, Everyone thought they had the cross, but he didn't have the cross. That was like 100 years later or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah.
And when they discovered the 3 crosses, they also discovered the inscription tablet.
Yeah.
That Saint Helena divided into 3 pieces. She sent a portion to her son, Constantine, another to a Roman church, Santa Croce, and the other remained in Jerusalem. Yeah.
Cool.
So like lots of stuff from that time. Considering,
and there's a lot of history written down. Like I found dates, I found times. Like the True Cross was found on September 14th of 320 AD.
Right, that's why we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Cross.
Yeah, exactly. But that's because that's the day it was found.
When we're talking about kind of the authentication process of these, that like again, there's a lot more credibility to the Hellenist story than like this is just a legend of Constantine's mother. It's like, no, this is probably the first time Christians had the latitude to travel freely, the resources to acquire these things.
And the scribes to write it down.
Yeah, exactly.
The journey. Yeah.
The holy nails.
Yeah,
we have those too, right?
We believe so.
Yeah, I think one is at Santa Croce in Rome. The other one,
there's France. I think France and Jerusalem, I think, are the other. Is that what?
Okay, so one is at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris.
Oh yeah, France.
One is at the Cathedral of Saint Mary of the Flowers in Florence.
Oh, Florence.
And apparently one is also, or a piece of it is in Germany, at the Cathedral of St. Peter.
Yeah, strangely, there are a lot of, you would say, kind of first class. I don't know if they're even, it would be kind of second degree relics of Jesus in Germany. You would
like, remember we talked about the Magi?
Yeah.
The relics of the 3 Magi we celebrate the Epiphany are in the Cathedral of Cologne, Germany, that huge Gothic, beautiful-looking church, right in the sanctuary.
Yeah.
I think it's bones or their skulls or something.
And if I remember correctly, there is a church in Germany that claims to have the garment, the garment woven of a single thread that they cast lots for.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
You were talking about kind of verifying scientifically. They're not actually able, and this is why I remember it. They're not actually able to do any sort of carbon dating on it because in the 18th or 19th century, in an effort to preserve it, they dipped it in a petroleum byproduct kind of thing. They rubberized it effectively to keep it from which granted, it's at that point 1,800 years old, and it's fiber, like it's material. So and again, even looking at these relics, even the ones that have been dated, are the fact that even wood, I'm a woodworker, that wood is preserved and kept for 2,000 years is miraculous.
It's true.
Yeah.
And even I was really fascinated that even like during the crucifixion story, the sponge that was
that's like the lance, the sponge,
all that stuff.
Anything that touched Jesus during that time, we have a relic for. Now, that's where I say that I take everything with a word of caution, and if the church authenticates it, then it's a different story. Yeah. But a lot of these relics, I think, I have the sandals that Jesus wore, it would be like, and but But what is the purpose of the relic?
Yeah.
I guess is the question. And if it brings you closer, like, and I remember being at there's a church that has the stairs where Pilate, and it was moved into Rome, into the area.
You have to go up on your knees.
You go up on your knees, and but there's little drops of blood that are like crystallized over with glass, and so you could see the drops of blood on the stairs. I remember that, and those are believed to be the blood of Jesus and everything else. And I know for people that we were in the pilgrimage and the tour with, it was a life-changing experience to be there. But like, again, we talked about this with Medjugorje, we talked about this with going to Fatima or any of those places. When you go, if you're going, and if this experience helps you open your heart to have a deeper relationship with God, then if that's what the relic does, just help you understand a little more about the passion, or opens your heart, your faith, and everything else, then good. That's where God is bringing you to these areas to have that one-on-one connection with you. It's not necessarily that the relic necessarily holds any power or holds any, you know what I mean? So, and sometimes, a lot of times, those first-class relics, miracles are happening, as we talk about with the True Cross and stuff, around those relics, which is kind of cool. There could also be the relic themselves is kind of somewhat of a miracle, depending on the story and depending on the scientific evidence and stuff that pass it. Right. And so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, even that relics exist. Again, I'm coming from a Protestant background where this isn't part of the tradition.
Yeah.
Again, you have that Martin Luther quote that is, kind of speaking irreverently or kind of dismissively about relics, that you don't have this. But in that context, or in my experience, it's easy to make your faith this kind of distant, abstract, hyper spiritual thing. Relics bring your attention to the concrete reality of our faith. That this was a historical event, and you're absolutely right. You want to display caution. You don't want to hinge your faith on any one specific relic being, authentic or the actual real deal. Because again, if something comes out to challenge that idea, again, you don't want to hang your hat on that particular hook. But again, just relics in general, or even a pilgrimage, a process of prayer, where you're moving towards venerating a specific relic, or a contemplation of the Passion of Christ. These can be really powerful sacramentals. These can be really powerful aids to prayer. They can be catalysts for conversion.
Exactly.
Yeah. So again, like relics on the whole, again, really, really open our eyes to the concrete reality of our faith.
Yeah, and even like just with sites, like places that this happened, like the site of the crucifixion, the site of the tomb where Jesus walked, the tomb where Jesus was buried, even like where Jesus was baptized. All these are tourist places. They're not tourist places, but they're places where people go to have that closeness to Jesus, to walk where he walked, to be there, to have this experience of faith. Of course, it's something that could deepen and strengthen faith. Yeah. Like I've never been to the Holy Land, which we're going to work on. So
one of these days,
film an episode of the Catholic Buzz in the Holy Land. But imagine when we go to the Holy Land, the scriptures must just come alive. Yeah. Like, you read the readings, St. Paul went here and there and all these different locations and things. And you're like, oh, well,
we're here right now.
We're here. And the same thing when you see some of these holy relics, it must bring the stories alive. It must bring this closeness with Jesus that maybe, like these relics can further deepen our closeness to Jesus. The crown of thorns is something we didn't mention yet, but apparently it was sort of like a cap sort of style that they would put crown of thorns on, and this is preserved right now in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. So I hope it wasn't
in the fire.
I didn't hear it. It was destroyed by the fire.
They weren't sure when the fire initially happened, but there was a huge effort to kind of locate it after, and make sure that it was all right.
And why I mentioned it's kind of like a type of cap with like a circular band or like a wreath. Is because that people are like, well, that's not how it's depicted, but it's supported by the Shroud of Turin. And the image on the Shroud of Turin. And we haven't mentioned the Shroud of Turin
yet. No, because I'm going to geek out way hard.
Yeah, so tell us about the Shroud of Turin.
Okay, so the Shroud of Turin is based on the burial shroud. So basically they would have covered Jesus' body in a shroud. They would have wrapped it from head to toe one way, and then they would have went like up the front, down the back type thing, and then wrapped it around his body. And that's kind of how they would have buried any Jewish man at that time. But the cool thing about the Shroud of Turin is that there was a lot of scientific evidence. There's a lot of things going on. We have a lot of history with the Shroud of Turin. And then there was a lot of cool things going on at that time that we can understand from like the 1950s all the way up to 1988. One of the things that happened in 1988 is we came up with the new scientific evidence talked about carbon dating. And so this relic of the church that has been honorated and venerated from like the, as long as we can kind of have paperwork to kind of suggest that it's like from 1200 AD plus on, suggests like we've been honoring this relic that is it has stains of the blood of Jesus, but it's very very much an image of a man front and back, the whole body of a man that's been crucified. We know that they've been crucified, that they've been scourged, that they've been whipped to a degree because of the where the blood like seeps through on certain parts of the cloth and everything else. And if you look up the Shroud of Turin, I mean, it's a they call it the negative image of what Jesus would have looked like inside the shroud. And so this is the shroud that they believe that has been left behind after Jesus resurrects from the dead, kind of thing. Probably was the shroud that the angel was folding at the in the tomb, kind of thing. In 1988, it was Pope Benedict, but Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, people challenged the Shroud of Turin, and he said, "Okay, go ahead. Why don't we test it? Why don't we use science to either prove or disprove this is going on?" And now remember, at this time, people have been studying this, have been looking at all the different marks on it, have noticed the crown of thorns, as you're saying, more of a cap type thing. They know that just the hair, he was a Nazarene, like all these different kind of facts that they got, and what they eventually get to the point, they carbon date it. And the carbon dating comes back. And the carbon dating suggests that it's from 1200 to 1300 AD. And this was on display over news and paper all in 1988, all over the place, saying, radiocarbon dating has proven the Shroud of Turin to be false. And it was a big thing. And so basically it got to the point where science has proven that this religious article that we have, which is called the Shroud of Turin, is not. And Pope Benedict was one of the ones, I mean, at the time he's Cardinal Ratzinger, helped organize the scientific findings of this. A couple things that came out after now, where in 2017, and it never made the news, believe it or not, which is that 30 years later, now the Freedom of Information Act allows those universities who have done all the testing and did all that stuff, there's 3 universities that tested it, to come out with the process and how they did it and how everything was done. They kept it hidden up until that point. And people were asking, but they were saying, no, we're not going to tell anybody. So up 30 years later, in 2017, it came out. And it's now been unauthenticated, meaning their study and their research based on it wasn't done properly for a couple of different reasons. First of all, their carbon dating, the way that they were supposed to do it, they were supposed to have 7 different universities doing it from 7 different pieces of cloth. And what eventually ended up happening was they couldn't afford 7 because it was a lot of expense. So they went down to 3. And instead of 3 from 3 different areas of the cloth, as you would expect from this cloth and image and everything else, they took 3 from one single sample. And so they all tested the same single sample. And the problem with this single sample is it's from the top left-hand corner, right-hand corner, I can't remember which one, top corner of the sheet. And if you look, anytime you have a picture of somebody holding the Shroud of Turin, because at one time they just held it with bare hands, like you had priests and cardinals and bishops holding it up like a normal sheet of paper. They're holding it from the corners, right, where the and so they took a small little segment from one of these corners. 2 things that are of note here. After we now have the technology of UV light and detection and all that kind of stuff, a UV light was put on the Shroud of Turin, and it was caramelized color all throughout the entire shroud, except for that top left corner where they took the piece from, and it was like a very, very luminous green color, which is weird from the rest of everything else is brown and caramel, and this is like bright green. And so very much. And then what ended up happening was a woman, a librarian, she took pictures of the cloth in that area. She started bringing it around to loom experts and saying, "Okay, we feel like there's something going on with this green thing going, this green side. What is going on here?" And stitch work. There's no stitch work, so we can't. It looks like a different piece of fabric, but we can't see the stitch working lining. And a bunch of loom experts talked about the 16th century. She didn't tell it was a Shroud of Turin or anything else. She just said, "What can you tell me about this looking fabric?" And it was that, okay, this is a stitchwork pattern known in the 16th as patchwork. And so what they basically did was they unwove the fabric to, like, if a corner ripped off, let's say, they unwove the fabric, and then they took a piece that was very similar, and then they kind of like meshed the two pieces in together, and it was so carefully done that it's hardly ever noticeable. You can't really see it other than a single one line that's out, and that's what you find in this specific shroud. Which is so it's now believed that there's evidence that that one corner was ripped off, and not only that, it's a totally different color under UV light than everything else, and that's also because when they did that, you have a worn piece of fabric, and then a bright white linen piece that's sewed into the corner. So they used to try to dirty it up with basically an oil from a tree. So they would kind of rub it in. So a couple things. They radioactive dated this Shroud of Turin, and they found, this is from 1200 to 1300 AD, and 95% certainty that all three universities came up with the same thing. First of all, they took the same piece of cloth. To carbon date anything, you have to burn it. And so they burn it beyond all recognition, so nobody can go back and test the piece of cloth to see, And so three universities all came, and they were supposed to do a blind study, meaning they're supposed to do it completely by themselves, and they ended up collaborating with each other. And so coming out with, instead of three different universities coming out with their own stuff, they all talked to each other and then came to conclusion together that this was it. So there's all things to say. Now we have conclusive evidence that the Shroud of Turin is actually real. Specifically, that they use a thing called wide-angle X-ray scattering. And so this was just done in 2018, I believe it was, 2019. And basically what this is a more precise way of measuring the natural aging of flax cellulose and converting it into a time since manufacture. And so one of the reasons why this is well used now, I mean, with technology and everything else, is that it doesn't destroy the fabric. So you can actually do it on pieces of fabric and not destroy it. It's just a way of X-raying it and figuring this out. And so what they found was when they did that this place, he placed the Shroud of Turin. This is De Caro, who studied it. And so he placed the Shroud of Turin against the samples that he found from documented cases from 300 BC all the way to 2000 AD. So and he measured, and it was found that it most closely matched a piece from the siege of Masada, Israel in 55 to 74 AD. So they're basically saying this is from about the 55 to 74. It's around that time period somewhere. So that's how they
matches a similar piece.
Similar piece. And so so they're saying this is, because we know that this is from 55 to 74 AD. With all our imaging and stuff, we're saying it's from around that period. We don't know how. The other cool thing is they measured the proteins and the cellulose and all that kind of stuff from the top corner, and they found that there's vanillin, which is something that is grown only, like the fabric and stuff, is only found in plant protein in England, which is what they were saying. So this was manufactured in Middle Ages and everything else, but that was in the top right corner. Throughout the rest, we can now have the technology to look at the rest of the weaves throughout nowhere else is vanillin found at all. So that means that it has to have been made, this cloth has to have been made before, first of all, in the Middle East from the fabrics that we found, and before 800 AD. So it's no longer this 1200, like this doesn't hold up at all. Yeah. The cool part about this, the image could not have been created by any technology known to man right now. It's so thin. It's like a slice of a hair times a slice of a hair times like if you take a hair, slice it in half 5 times or 6 times. That's how thin this burn mark is on top. So there's blood, and then there's a burn mark, and this burn mark is the image that appears on this thing. And we don't have the technology now today to put a laser into that burn mark, and so. There's so much stuff going on in the Shroud of Turin. I can geek out about it all day. But it's one of those relics that if you want to, there's a great podcast by Pints of Aquinas, Matt Fradd, and he talks to one of the priests that is the leading expert in this area now. And they talk about all the things that just came out, just like in the last year, 2 years, 3 years. And it's a 3-hour podcast. It's got tons of information in it. But if you're listening to it, it's all scientifically backed and proven now. And they don't know how, it's just amazing. How they could have possibly put an image on there. We can't do it today with the lasers that we have. The fact that a guy tested and tried to figure out how to burn an image like that onto a piece of paper, it would have to take wattage. Like the light could burn it, but his suggestion was that the wattage would take such a high amount of wattage that we don't even really have, like either a laser or a really flash bright flash. And neither of those do we have the technology yet to do. But also that doesn't burn through the fabric. It's only that one little bit of layer, which suggests that something very lightly but very fast burnt onto that piece of paper, onto that shroud. So really kind of cool stuff. The image is an inverted image. So meaning if you take the inverse of that image, it's an actual image of, like, it's like a photo negative of Christ or of a man. So kind of cool. Anyways, so there's a lot of stuff going on. If you want, look into the Shroud of Turin. You're going to find a lot of negative stuff going on around the 1988 time period, because that's when a lot of people came out and said, oh, it's false. But now look at 2017 and look up De Caro, because he's the one that kind of proved that it's all true now. And he went in and did the carbon dating extra stuff. And so cool stuff.
And if someone wants to go see the Shroud of Turin, it is found in Turin, Torino, in Italy, at the Chapel of the Holy Shroud.
Yeah.
So the Shroud of Turin, well, that's you've cleaned us out of time,
okay, sorry,
Josh.
that was fun,
so that's all the time we have today. But look, these beautiful things about these relics, they kind of unite, like, the divine and the human experience. Like this is like Jesus divine here on earth. We have remnants of him here. It's actually really quite beautiful. If anyone has any stories of seeing a relic, maybe you have something in your basement that belongs to Jesus. I don't know. Drop us a line at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com or drop a line in the comments. For Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Melgen, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.